Hi, I'm Matt Banker, Associate Athletic Director, University of Louisville, and we're here with AthleticDirectorU, and our topic today is dealing with constant industry changes. And my guests today are Athletic Director, University of South Florida, Michael Kelly,
Hey there.
and Pat Hobbs, Athletic Director, Rutgers University. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And so it would be the understatement of the year to say that college athletics is quiet. The environment's pretty stable right now, and so with that in mind and joking aside, issues like the economy, ticket sales, Supreme Court decisions, things like that. Aside from identifying the issues, as athletic directors, how do you prioritize those issues for your athletics department?
Well, there is always constant change that we've got to stay on top of, and you hope it's never unforeseen change, because whether pressure we put on ourselves or our senior staff to kind of make sure we can kind of stay in tune with everything, to hopefully we're not totally blindsided, but still things happen all the time in terms of what things are happening. But it's for me, when change comes, I think you always try to stay to your guiding principles of what's best for, obviously what's going to be the best for the student athlete experience to the extent that you can provide for with the means and resources that you have. And that's kind of the ever building challenge for us, is to know and go to the extent of what we can provide and resource wise. But those are kind of the two governing principles for us.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Michael said. What I would add is it is the one constant, right, that there's going to be change. I mean, just when you're celebrating something and having some success on some front, you get that call the next morning and it says we've got an issue. And you don't want to say get used to that, but in a way you do. You expect it, sort of expect what's the next thing. So you're trying to track sort of the national issues that obviously are going to need your attention and your focus, but there's also the local issues as well. And if you have 24 programs, and as I say to folks, if you have 700 student athletes between the ages of 18 and 22, you're going to have crises, you're going to have issues, you're going to have things that have to be dealt with. And so then you just want to make sure you have a good team. You want to make sure you have good protocols in place so that the team that you it's not new in the sense of who do we sit at the table, who do we start talking to. Those people are there, you get the best guidance, and you make judgment calls, and they're going to be criticized because some of them are going to work out well and some of them aren't going to work out so well, but you do the best you can in that moment.
So Pat, you mentioned utilizing your team. Can you kind of speak to your senior staff and how you help support and lead them so that they can mobilize and handle the changes on the horizon, the next big thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate. I've got some really, really talented people working for me, and I trust them. They trust me. And then within the university itself, whether you're working with the general counsel's office or some of the other units within the university, they're seasoned people. I mean, you'd like to say, I wish we hadn't been through a lot of issues at Rutgers University, but we've been through enough so that we have teams in place. They've been through things before. I think the difference today in the group that I have and the confidence that we have in them is they've faced some really difficult issues over the last decade. They've weathered it. We're making progress. Sometimes that's not always evident out there. But we feel pretty confident about the direction we're going. And I think that's the other piece you have to have, is you have to have a confidence that we can get through this. We can. There's not a school in the country that doesn't face some hardship, some chaos, and some crisis that they're dealing with. And so it's having that group in place and tasking them. You've got to trust your people. And fortunately, I've got a great group of people.
And Michael, can you speak to your senior team and how you support them in those situations?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, aspiring to the same things that Pat is talking about. As a relatively new athletic director, being on the job for about 5 months now, I've been able to both inherit a great team of people that were here before, and then also have been able to bring in a few people that I've been looking at with the concept of trying to build a team of different experts with different, with diversity, but also of different backgrounds and ways of looking at things. And I think that helps us as a group make key decisions when the change comes up. So we've got some people that have been kind of lifers in directly in college athletics, and some that have not, and I think that it's building a great team I'm excited about. Kind
of a good mixture of the local experience and expertise with fresh voices at the table.
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing that I've realized that Pat kind of hit on a little bit is I'm very grateful that the President Genshaft allows me to sit on her cabinet meetings, because not only can I learn from the other senior VPs, if you will, from the university, and rely a lot on general counsel and the president as well, But there's a lot of education that we get, but it helps us to be able to educate the issues of college athletics to them. Because as they continue to evaluate as a relatively young university what athletics should and does mean to the university, it helps to educate them because they're focused on a lot. There's change going on in the university as a whole too, of course. And for us it's my job to be able to educate them on what's hitting us in athletics.
Certainly, be a good partner across campus. So, one thing aside from all these external or existential issues that may be out there facing Division I college athletics, sometimes looking internally at the membership and just using sort of the governance and legislative area as an example. Division I has had a high appetite for proposing a lot of rule changes year after year. And there might be a couple of schools of thought there. One is it time to maybe tap the brakes and maybe just focus on a few particular issues? Or on the flip side, is it a natural byproduct that Division I is proposing over 100 different changes every single year for the last several years? I guess we'd like to get your thoughts on, is it just sort of the reaction, 21st century, very diverse membership, or should we be a little bit more acute in terms of the focal point as we sit here at NCAA convention?
Well, I think the changes and the things that have happened quite recently are a good thing in general. Obviously, it's been all with the intention of improving the experience for the student athlete and adjusting to things that probably needed to change. I don't know enough yet to say if I'd be in favor of a moratorium per se. I don't know if artificial barriers are always the right thing to do, but it is pretty clear that sometimes as we're going so fast that at least finding and learning as we go in terms of putting things that you might not have unintended consequences, if you can at least think them through even a little bit more. It seems like most of them worked out. Some haven't. It seems like we're changing it the next year and adjusting it slightly on a whim, which is understandable. But I think we're starting to feel our way and it ultimately land in a good place. So I don't think I'm there for the full moratorium by any means, but would listen to that concept. But I think more importantly, just let's make sure we're doing the right thing. And Pat's involved with more of the autonomy 5 things and might have a different, have other additional outlooks because there are more legislation that affects his institution than do mine.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I do think that what's important is what's motivating a lot of these suggested changes in the legislation that we're seeing. And as Michael pointed out, it's what's in the best interest of the student athlete. And sometimes that's not what the student athlete thinks. So that's some of the conversation we will get into. And I think, maybe some of the stuff was brought forward quickly to try to address real concerns and to show action. And we're now looking at some of the consequences, the unintended consequences of some of those things. But on the whole, I think we're getting it right. We're making it a better environment. In some ways, our coaches might not think so because it's making their jobs more difficult at times. But that's where society is going. Things are evolving, and we have to do this. We have to show that we're an environment that puts the student athlete first. And so I think when you have those changes and those suggested rules where that's the focus, let's have the conversation. And I don't really think that sort of putting a moratorium on any of it is helpful because what happens then when you really need to address it? Now you've got to sort of overrule the moratorium, and that really never makes sense.
Sure.
Kind of like Coach Wooden used to say, we need to be quick, but don't hurry.
That's right.
You need to adjust and adjust to change with it.
Pull those socks up, don't be quick.
That's right.
So, and we're here again with Michael Kelly, University of South Florida Athletic Director, and Pat Hobbs, Athletic Director at Rutgers University. And so I want to come back to both of you on, we're talking sort of global issues, but 2019, the calendar has turned. Can you speak to the 1 or 2 issues that are at the top of your watch list for this coming calendar year?
Well, for me, there's always a lot that we all have to keep an eye on. Obviously, the continuing looks at what can be provided to student athletes, the whole lawsuits that are always pending as it relates to the principle of amateurism are top and center, as the Supreme Court decision came down on gambling and how that might impact various states that ultimately look at sports gambling in that regard are 2 that certainly come to the top of mind that are kind of outside influencers in terms of what can happen.
So, I feel we're very fortunate in the Big Ten Conference led by Jim Delaney, who's a very forward-thinking person. So he tries to raise these issues. We have sort of AD retreats where we talk about all variety of issues, whether it's what we're providing for student athletes. So we're fortunate in that sense. So we have a leading conference that's focused on these issues. But for me, again, it comes back to the health and safety of our students is something that we're learning more and more and more today about. Things that are affecting the health and safety. Mental wellness issues are becoming so much more important now with our student athletes. We just did a program back on campus about that just yesterday. And then the other part of it is sort of the business side, if you will, and that is attendance, national attendance numbers, and looking at this is a digital generation coming up. I look at young people and how much they want to come out to games. It's the 12-year-old, 13, 14-year-old that becomes the cemented college football fan for life, or college basketball, whatever the sport happens to be. And there's an erosion of that, in part by the way youth sports are organized today. And so I think it's something we're going to have to continue to look at and think about. Somebody once said that if the top 3 spectator sports in 1930, number 1 was boxing. Okay, that's certainly not the case today, right? Number 2 was boxing. Number 3 was baseball. Baseball's still there. But number 1 was horse racing, harness racing, right? And so you think to yourself, okay, well, that's nowhere on the radar today. So where are we going? And part of that is who's going to be in the seats for that experience.
So you mentioned the mental health part. Obviously, it's become central focus across the country, all 3 divisions, certainly. Can you kind of speak to what both of your schools are doing and looking at from the athletics department in terms of staying in front of it?
Oh, sure. I mean, obviously it's impacting our student athletes, but it's affecting young people as a whole more than ever before in history. I think I've read recently that the level of anxiety that young teenagers feel today would be, in essence, something that would be placed in a facility back in the 40s and 50s. So it's just an amazing amount of stress that people are dealing with today. And then when you compound that with what our student athletes go through with the demanding schedule they have, the variety of backgrounds, things that are going on in their life, it's fascinating. So we were proud to be the first in the American Athletic Conference to have a full-time professional on staff to kind of deal from a counseling standpoint, both from a sports psychology standpoint and on a behavioral health standpoint. And we quickly realized that as much as we were proud about being a leader in that, it still hasn't been enough, and we've been able to work with our university in this past year since I've been there to be able to add more bandwidth, just to be able to be there. Because I know Pat talked about 700. We've got 475 at South Florida, and more and more are starting to utilize it. The great thing about it is between what we've done as a conference and what all the SAC groups from the American have really made mental health a important initiative for theirs. They had a whole special week dedicated to it. It's the main thing for it. And so as a result, it's reduced some of the stigma about needing help and being able to talk. So it's okay to talk about it and be okay. And I think that's an important step to giving our student athletes what they need.
I agree. I remember my sort of prior role as dean of the law school when I first started. We probably had 4 or 5% of students that were on prescription medication dealing with anxiety, depression, whatever it was. By the time I finished in 2015, that was probably 1/3 of the student body. And those numbers are reflected in the general student body at Rutgers University and certainly with our student athletes. So there's leadership there. There's leadership at the university. Dr. Barchi has made it a very specific focus of him that we're going to provide these resources to our young people. And then on the student athlete side, the effect, and we're really only starting to truly learn the effect of social media on the mindset of a young person. But you watch them after a poor performance in a game. They're looking up, they're on social media, they're reading the commentary that people are saying about them, and they are bringing that into themselves in a way where they're not sleeping, they're reacting. None of us had to face that, right? That's sort of something that's really in the last 5 to 7 years that it's become such a critical part of how they view themselves. And I love when I see some of these athletes now say they're turning off social media and they're not paying attention to it, because that is not the place you should go to find your worth in life, as we all know. Certainly AD shouldn't be reading it most of the time.
That's a great point. And sometimes, and I know I've only been through it for 1 year, and I do look at it a lot, so it's painful to me. But when I see what they say to our kids and our coaches, sometimes the defeat and the reaction, or I won't say sometimes, all the time, even from visiting fans, your own fans, is more hurtful than the defeat itself. It's crazy. So it does have an impact, and all the more reason we have to provide more resources and find the positive attributes of how to use social media. But boy, it's tough on our kids.
No question, double-edged sword, and certainly going back to the mental health sort of support that all institutions are really paying attention to. That's got to be moving right at the top of the list. In part, like you said, social media impacts, just the ubiquitous pressures that student athletes and just college students in general have these days.
Well, I'm very pleased our university looks at it that way. I mean, again, we're a subset of much larger, student enrollments. We've got 50,000 students. So I'm worried, about the 475 that we deal in day and out. So yes, our university is investing in it and realizing it impacts the whole student body in a big way.
So we've touched on a variety of topics that, again, the central theme today is really about the shifting sands. All you know is that change is coming. How do you measure your own success? How do you sort of self-assess how you're doing to handle these issues, whether it's what happens with sports wagering or how you implement mental health support for student athletes on campus?
I'll pass it on that.
Okay, I think you do the best you can do, right? You bring your experience, and both of us obviously have had a variety of experiences in life, and you try to bring all of that to bear on your job. And people tell you whether you're doing a good job or not. Now, if you go to the social media side, that's probably not where you should go for validation. But you're in a university. You're part of a senior leadership team. You've got great assistants there. When you need input, you can get input. And then you have to trust yourself, and you have to make decisions. One of the things I tell my folks is the failure to make a decision is a decision in and of itself. And then you leave a situation. And one of our alums said to our group, gave a nice talk to our group once and said, problems don't age well. And so, we all ingrain that. Problems don't age well. So when you got a problem, you got to deal with the problem. And I think that's how I judge myself, is when we get to the end of the year, what things cropped up. Did we deal with them? Did we deal with them in a timely manner? And do we make progress? What I like to say to folks at the end of the day, and I got this from our basketball coach, Coach Peichel, Rutgers got better today. So if at the end of the day we could say Rutgers got better today, we're doing our jobs.
Yeah, for me, again, still relatively new. It is kind of evaluating on a day-by-day basis, and kind of that daily win standpoint is a great way to judge it, at least how I've approached it so far. I mean, so much happens. I've felt so many wins and losses on a given day. I'm not even talking about in sports, but to the point Pat made a couple minutes ago in terms of and that's what I love about the job, quite frankly, is the variety of who you deal with. 1 minute you're talking to your staff, 1 minute you're talking to a student athlete, a parent, a coach, a conference, staff member. It's just a great variety, and some of it's good news, some of it's bad news. It feels like you just want to walk out the office at the end of the day with winning the day, and sometimes that's hard. But it's energetic, it's energizing to be around everybody, and just trying to continue to build a culture that stay calm, play to your strengths, and let's try to get through every day and treat each other well. And if you do that, it should end up in the right way.
Very good.
No 2 days are alike, and I know I speak for Michael. The best part of our experience is when a young student athlete comes up and says thank you for something you did. Makes it all worth it.
Got their degree and they're ready for life.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty special, because sometimes that's happened already and you don't even realize they even noticed you. So the fact that they know and appreciate it is really, really meaningful.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen. Again, we're talking today about dealing with the constant change in Division I athletics. Michael, Pat, thanks for your time.
Thank you
very much.